I'm senior advisor to the Blackstone Group, which is another multinational which has just entered Israel. I'm very, very happy and honored to be here, and I would first like to salute the incredible minds and spirits and hearts that have made DLD in Israel probably the greatest, the most vibrant, and best attended event Israel has ever had. It's growing from year to year, it's changing its venues from year to year, and it's actually better every year. So I'm sure on behalf, first of all, I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to salute Yossi Vardi and Helmut Burda and the great team headed by Orly Shani and by Ruti Koren for the great job they're doing. Thank you very, very much. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this. We have a great panel this morning representing the best of the multinationals who have made Israel their home. You will hear from them different opinions. I warn you that you will hear probably there's 6 or 7 of us. You may hear 6 or 7 opinions, but that is Israel. And also this should not surprise any of you who've been to New York lately and may have noticed that major hospitals in New York have a big sign up saying Jewish patients should bring their second opinion first. So we will hear different opinion. We'll hear a multitude of opinions. And I'm really just the chairman. It is the panel that will try and bring to you their perspectives. You know, when I say I'm just the chairman, it reminds me of a story about the guy who goes to a bird shop and he wants to buy a parrot, and he sees a green parrot on the left. He says, "How much is it?" They tell him $5,000. He says, $5,000 for a parrot? You're crazy, you're out of your mind. What does he do? He said, he speaks 4 languages, he plays the piano, and he has a doctorate in physics. And then he sees a red parrot on the right, and he says, "How much is this one?" They say, $10,000. What does he do? They say, well, he speaks 7 languages, he plays both the piano and the cello, and he has a PhD in nuclear physics and in chemistry. And then he sees an old parrot in the corner. He says, "How much is he?" He says, "That parrot is $25,000. He says, "What? $25,000 for a parrot? What does he do?" He says, "Tell you the truth, I have no idea, but the other 2 call him Mr. Chairman." So that's my role today. And I'm sure we'll hear very, very interesting perspectives. From my perspective, as Orly told you, I served for 6 years as Israel's ambassador to the UN. During that period, I tried to bring to my colleagues and to the world Israel beyond the conflict, the real Israel, not the one you see on the television screens and the ones you see on the cable networks, not the one that is perceived as a place of terror and bloodshed and problems and dangers, but the one of excellence, of technology, of innovation, of beauty, the real Israel, the one you know, the one on my panel know. And it's not easy. It's really not easy to bring the reality of what Israel is all about to the minds of people who are subjected to all those news 24/7. And I believe that among the other very, very important roles of multinational companies is that in essence, without even knowing it, they are and they create thousands of ambassadors who go out to the respective countries and are able, after being here, while being here, to tell the story of what Israel is really like, to tell the story of what the culture is like, of what the eco-culture is like, of what the social life and the cultural life is like, and of course tell the story of their respective companies and of their success in Israel. And truly there are no better ambassadors than people who've come here, touched Israel, felt Israel, got to know Israel, and can they then go back to their respective countries, or from here, while they're here, put out the message of what Israel is really all about. So I'm sure that when we hear from my colleagues here, we will hear that side as well. We will hear why Israel, why they chose Israel, why do large multinationals come to Israel and smaller companies maybe still don't, what Israel has offered them, what made them come here in the first place, what challenges they face, what problems they face, what success they have seen, what they think Israel should do better, what they feel Israel is doing right. And, as you know, we are in the midst of a very, very big discussion about multinational companies in Israel. Should they be exempt or enjoy lower taxes? By the way, in a preliminary talk we had, I realized that I think all or most of our participants here are not interested parties in that, because they do not actually manufacture in Israel. They have design centers, they have marketing centers, they have centers of great excellence, but because they do not manufacture, this whole taxation issue is not something that relates to them immediately or specifically. But it may be interesting to hear what they think about that debate as well. I can tell you my opinion very quickly. I know it's controversial, especially with all the populism and the street protests that we see. But I think Israel should give multinational companies more than any other country in the world. We should just survey what each country, whether it's Ireland or Korea or the Netherlands or Scandinavia or states in the United States give, and give more. Because the benefits of having multinational companies in Israel, it far outweighs any cost of a tax break or a tax exemption or any other benefits that we give them. But that is my personal opinion, and I'm not sure whether my colleagues will even want to get into it. So we will start the panel, and we will start actually by the order that you have in your booklets. So the first will be Bruno Fernandez Ruiz, who is a senior fellow and a vice president at Yahoo. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, I guess. We run, Yahoo has 2 development centers in Israel, one in Haifa, one in Tel Aviv. Haifa is more oriented towards the R&D, traditional R&D, whereas Tel Aviv is more on the engineering side. I personally run native advertising and stream advertising for Yahoo across Tel Aviv, London, and Sunnyvale. We entered, basically our presence here was conditioned on 2 things. One is we bought a company called Dapper 3 years ago. And we kept that team, we grew that team. When we bought that company, it was 6 people. We're now crossing the borderline of 30 in Tel Aviv. And then in Haifa, we did a similar thing with 1 person that has grown a team to over 40 people. We found that within the context of Yahoo, what is actually really attractive about Israel is, I guess beyond the hummus, it's a culture that I found very similar to the West Coast. I'm based in London, and sometimes I find it more difficult to bridge even Boston, New York, London with how things are aggressively done way faster in the West Coast, how people innovate, are not afraid to make mistakes and just keep correcting. And I find part of that, aggressive behavior, you can see it, people driving on the street, and the way that the waiters serving the tables, the same thing you find it in the corporate environment. And actually, I think it's a positive trait. I think the opposite trait, which is either conservatism or passive aggressiveness, are damaging to an ability of startups to innovate. The second key thing that I think we're seeing here that it's just natural, right? It's a very small country. It's a very focused country. It's a country that, I make the joke that in the 90s, every company that came out of here was a toolbar company. Then in 2000, every company was an ad tech company. Now companies are becoming, there's the next wave. But 30 years ago, maybe it was hardware. And actually, that helps. You have a system that filters to have concentration of certain skills, which actually help us find the right talent to hire if it's the right ecosystem. The ecosystem part of that talent is actually critical, right? You look at how Silicon Valley was created, it's three things coming together that I think only happen here. One is talent, that is definitely presence, and the army actually plays a key role of that. The second one is multinational companies that are actually consuming that talent and getting people to actually train, understand the very large scale operations, at least in the world of the internet, get to learn the trade. And then you have money. Those people leave, become entrepreneurs, they create startups, and you start closing the loop. You look across the world, this is probably together with the West Coast, one of those places where you can find all three things at the same time. And it's making it very interesting for us because it's a healthy ecosystem that it starts growing. And the more we invest here, the more we see that actually becomes easier to hire in these domains and easier to bootstrap. We don't run a business in Israel, as you were mentioning. We don't manufacture, we don't even sell. We don't have an advertising business here. However, I think that from our perspective, from a technology standpoint, I used to actually live in Beijing for a year, running the R&D center there, and it's a huge contrast. I can tell that this is extremely connected to Sunnyvale, despite not having a business. And whereas China, that has a closer relation to APAC, that's actually a very active and fertile business for us, is actually further away to what Sunnyvale is. The same with India in a way, right? India is a business and it has the technology organization, but it's actually different. And I think this is a strength of Israel that you guys should really, I'm hoping that, being part of Yahoo and coming here like every month, we can get that cycle going. At least we're trying. We're growing a center. We're actually hiring actively. And I hope we can help, as you say, it's 50 ambassadors. These people go back and forth. They leave Yahoo, but they join another company and start doing the same. And it's a loop that is tremendously important for clearing the stereotypes that might come around the country and the Middle East.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bruno. You mentioned the similarity between Israel and the West Coast. Do you know what the second language, the second spoken language in Silicon Valley is?
Spanish.
No. Well, maybe Spanish is the second, then English is the third, because Hebrew is the first. Which brings me, by the way, if any of you want to discuss it, there's a lot of discussion in Israel at the moment about the brain drain from Israel. We're all very happy to have you here, but we have a very strong current of Israelis actually leaving Israel and going, whether it's to Silicon Alley or Silicon Valley or Route 108 or wherever. We just had two Nobel Physics laureates who were described as Israelis but have lived in the United States for about 30 years. So that brain drain is something which we are battling with and thinking about a lot. If any of you want to comment on that, that would be great. The next speaker is Yannick Debaupte, who is Ecosystem and Development Director for Europe at Nokia. Please.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, and thanks for inviting us to this panel, and thanks for your participations. So my name is Yannick Debaupte. It's a complex name. If you make mistake with it, don't. I'm not going to be offended. I'm maybe going to start with a personal story which actually relates to your advocacy about Israel, and to speak a little bit about my journey to Israel, how I became acquainted or how I relate to Israel. So I've started my professional career in Johannesburg, in South Africa, in the telecom industry. And at the time, I dealt a lot with Israeli company working in the algorithm authentications of messages and this sort of thing. So it was a remote, connections with Israel. And then I spent the past 4 years in Russia, in Moscow, where actually I dealt with companies like Yandex or a lot of different VCs, which actually operating between Moscow and Israel. So once more, it was sort of a remote connections, see it from far away. And when I moved to this job, so I'm currently based in Finland, I actually had the opportunity to get Israel within the area I was covering. I mean, for us, Israel is part of Europe, thousands European country. And I mean, my connection with Israel was a little bit remote from far away. So we've got a sort of feeling that we need to be locally present out of the activity Nokia is actually running. We've got some activities in here. But I mean, from perspective of developer and ecosystem, we were like managing him from outside. And reading newspapers, I mean, being involved in the ecosystem, you realize that you certainly need to be there. So the first things we did, we tried to find who could be the right person to actually take care of our presence locally. So we interviewed a lot of different people. And I actually spent a lot of time with a lot of Israelis living in the US, not willing to come back. So they were willing to manage our Israeli operations out of the US. And I felt that it's maybe not the best way to get into the country, to operate locally. So we decided to find someone locally. And the first thing this person did, Lior Yekutieli, which is now running our operation here, did a fantastic job. So the first thing he told me, he said, don't try to make us work the way you work. I will explain how Israel works. So it was a little bit of a reverse process. The first thing he gave me this book, Startup Nations, that I've not read before. So I've heard about it, but not read. So I forced myself to read it, which actually a very good insight to our journey in Israel. And I was reading in the program today that a sentence from startup to scale up, which is a nice way of formulating it. And thanks to our journey in Israel, we actually start moving Israel from one of the remote countries we operate to a priority country for us. So we launched a product recently called Debaupte. So we moved from a startup to scale up to Debaupte, which is actually a frequent flyer program. I mean, why I'm raising this is because we turn away from having Israel on the remote operations on the map to actually a priority country to launching any single product we offer. So Israel is now part of our priority country in Europe. So we've got 10 countries. Whatever we launch in terms of technology, we try it out in here first, which makes it very interesting because the level of feedback we've got is actually more important. So Nokia as a company is actually 5 businesses today. Out of the 5 businesses, we have quite a long history with Israel. So the first one is our smartphone activity, our mobile phone activity, our locations and mapping activities, our licensing activities, and our network activities. As everyone knows, there are current discussions between Microsoft and Nokia in terms of Microsoft taking care of our purchasing part of Nokia activity. So Nokia will remain an independent company with 3 lines of business, which have been established in Israel for quite some time, for more than 20 years. In terms of sales and distributions, we've been here for the past 22 years. And as far as my activity is concerned, which is the developer and the startup, we're actually moving full stream to Israel. So from a remote journey to a local operations, we're actually pretty impatient to have the deal with Microsoft concluded, because merging our activity with their activity will actually reinforce our presence locally. So for us, Israel tends to be an interesting country in the sense that it's very challenging. So the way we look at our business versus the way Israeli startups look at our business, it's actually a lot of innovations we usually don't think of, which force us to actually review our activity in a slightly different way and force us to ask questions on how we should actually operate. So it's a fascinating market. I mean, I would be glad to share further experience. In terms of tax and system, we're actually not really selling directly locally with a legal entity, so I can't really comment on that. In terms of brand gen, it's a fascinating topic. So I'm currently based in Scandinavia. There is a lot of public effort which is being done to attract startups. I mean, places like Ireland as well are very, very innovative. So you've got a lot of competitions to attract companies. A lot of Israeli companies we deal with, as soon as a success starts, are relocating outside. So relocating in the US or relocating in other countries. What we try to do with our activity locally is to show that outside of the US, outside of Israel, there are a lot of opportunities. So we spend a lot of time educating developers and startups on what we do in India, or what we do in China, what we do in a lot of growing economies, and try to explain how Israeli developers can benefit out of these activities. Thank you.